In the dark heart of the Chaos Dwarf Empire, shackled prisoners shuffled into the Temple of Hashut. By the crack of burning whips, they were presented beneath the bull's burning gaze. At the epicenter of the forge, a behemoth, wrought from dark iron, lay dormant. Sinister incantations erupted, and hundreds of souls were cast into the magma. Awakened by the boiling blood of screaming sacrifices, the behemoth stirred to life. Its metallic, infernal roar sent quakes through the city. The Chaos Dwarfs were marching to war. Welcome to the next video in our series on the races of the Warhammer world, where we will cover the military units and tactics the Chaos Dwarfs utilize in battle. You might like the Chaos Dwarfs, but you certainly want to avoid the chaos that comes with using the internet, and the sponsor of this video, Opera Browser, is a perfect tool for that. It's an internet browser packed with usability and productivity features, and indeed one is that you can pop out any video into its own window, and place it over the top of anything else. That means you can keep watching while on another page, or you can take it outside of Opera entirely and watch while doing whatever else you want. After a few minutes online, you'll start needing the Tab Islands feature, where related pages are grouped together and can be collectively minimized to focus on what you're currently doing without closing them, which is really handy. You can even name or color code tabs, super useful. And to get through your tab backlog a little better, try the split screen mode. This lets you essentially view up to 4 tabs at the same time with a customizable split, ideal for studious cross-referencing or brain-rotting hyperstimuli. Let's say you've gone deep and have loads of tabs open. Do you remember what you were actually doing? The Tab Traces feature does. The marks under the tabs change in intensity the more recently you were there, so you can backtrack amid a mess of pages really easily, or get out of a rabbit hole before you go too deep. There's a lot more in Opera Browser too, but we're out of time, so why not poke around yourself by installing it for free via our link in the description or pinned comment. Where was Grimnir when our warriors were dying? Where was Valaya when our children sickened? When we called out for aid in the deep places where we delved, it was not Grungi who answered our call, but mighty Hashut who delivered us in our time of need. Who are the real traitors here? Our kin who abandoned us to madness and death, or we who only sought to survive against the forces of chaos? One day there will be a reckoning, and it will be the sons of the Father of Darkness who will have the victory, not the weak-willed spawn of the pathetic ancestor gods. Mordian Slagfist, Chaos Dwarf Warrior. As a consequence of the small population of Chaos Dwarfs, their armies were almost never solely made of dwarves alone. Much like their mountain-dwelling cousins, they channeled their mechanical expertise for the creation of great war machines. But even though their military strength relied on the machines, Chaos Dwarfs themselves were formidable warriors. Ultimate authority was always in the hands of the chief demonsmiths, called Sorcerer Prophets, who each commanded their own forces. Dwarf lords, under their direct control, were delegated management of militias. But not all militias were formed by Chaos Dwarfs alone. Their prominent slave industry enabled them to field plentiful infantry. Greenskins were favored by the Empire for their hardiness and their eagerness for war. Dwarf overseers ensured they remained in line and kept a watchful eye on the Hobgoblin Khans. Most slaves were destined to die as meat shields, but the Chaos Dwarfs were not above exploiting the strongest or sneakiest for more specific purposes. Chaos Dwarf infantries were a mix of heavily armored warriors and poorly outfitted slaves. Goblin and Orc laborers were always in high demand, not only for the operation of factories, but for their strategic sacrifice on the battlefield. Hordes of provoked greenskins were infamously unpredictable, so the dwarves sent them to their death en masse. Hobgoblins were the taller and leaner cousin to the goblins, and carefully goaded by their overseers to play the part of ambushers. They were universally despised, even by their own race, for being especially craven and treacherous. If it were not for the constant threat of punishment from their Chaos Dwarf masters, the other Orc and Goblin slaves would have exterminated them. Though they constantly teetered between unhinged violence and complete cowardice, Hobgoblins were feared assassins. Curved, razor-sharp blades were their preferred killing tool. Without the element of surprise, they fled from melee combat, and instead used crude bows to whittle down enemy numbers. These were no goblins, but the ultimate orcs, bred by magic in the slave pits of Zharr-Naggrund. Description of the Black Orcs. of the Chaos Dwarf slaves, the Black Orcs were the most potent warriors, but their strength came at a risky cost. It was at the hands of these magically bred hulks that their empire was nearly annihilated. Even though many broke free during the rebellion, some were dragged back to the slave pits to continue service to their cruel masters. They were elite, heavily armoured infantry, outfitted with the best weapons their overseers were willing to grant them. Black Orcs were the smallest population of slaves, and positioned with more care than their expendable counterparts. Despite this, their passion for war, even in bondage, guaranteed that they were always found where the fighting was most intense. When the slaves had thoroughly flooded the battlefield, the Chaos Dwarf warriors marched into the fray. They phased through the carnage as bulwarks of red-armoured infantry and crushed their enemies beneath weighty axes. It was not simply for fear of their commanders that the Chaos Dwarf warriors fought so ruthlessly, but for something more sinister. A bloodthirsty, merciless ambition to destroy anything and everything that dared oppose them. Mercy was a weak, foreign concept. Some warriors received specialty training to carry firearms instead of axes. A Chaos Dwarf blunderbuss was considered one of the deadliest gunpowder weapons of the known world. Cruel munitions, such as spiked iron shards, ripped through multiple lines of contesting infantry. Stones, hot coals, scrap metal, and even lead were used if needed. Even though Chaos Dwarf blunderbusses were ranged, they preferred to fire one volley into their foe and follow up with a crazed melee charge. Chaos Dwarf warriors often pledged themselves to warrior cults, though none were as notorious as the Infernal Guard. Sworn to defend the Black Fortress, their ranks were formed from dishonored dwarves. Their society was unforgiving, so dishonor could be attained from seemingly mild sources, being related to a failed commander, allowing slaves to revolt, or even something as simple as machinery breaking from overexertion. Ashamed, those dwarves traveled to the Black Fortress and took the Infernal Oath. Their relationships and names were left behind. Their faces were hidden and buried beneath a hot iron mask. As long as they carried shame, the mask was never removed. Only when they had achieved glory sufficient enough to wash away their dishonor could the mask come off. The process ripped apart the adhered flesh and left them scarred for life. In battle, they feverishly sought death in Hashut's grace and wielded tall great axes. Like Chaos Dwarf warriors, some Infernal Guard received special training to operate a fire glaive, a reinforced, repeating handgun glaive hybrid. If a soldier of the Guard had proven themselves as the best of the best, they were outfitted with the most expensive armor and sent to serve as bodyguards of sorcerer prophets. At least 10 were needed to form a regiment of Infernal Ironsworn, and were identifiable by the fiery glow of their blades and helms. Captains of the Infernal Guard were called Infernal Castellans. Along with their duties as military commanders, they trudged through the wastes on ceaseless drills. Castellans wore expensive sets of black shard armor. Forged through malevolent rituals of fire, blood, and souls, it was exclusively made by demonsmiths. Each set provided powerful protections against high temperature, fire, and physical damage. Chaos Dwarf women who were beyond their childbearing years still had the societal expectation to remain useful. The Harridans exclusively recruited these women to serve the priesthood of Hashut as ruthless zealots. Upon their acceptance into the cult, their tongues were removed with red-hot forge tongs. Harridans were unleashed as swift, lightly armoured berserkers who screamed unintelligible curses of hatred. Though the armies of Zharr-Naggrund preferred the might of infantry and machinery, they did field a limited number of cavalry units. Those conniving Hobgoblin tribes that roamed the Darklands were easy servants to lure into servitude as wolf-riding mercenaries. In exchange for their allegiance, however unreliable, the Chaos Dwarfs allowed them to reap the spoils. Scrap, shinies, weapons, and treasure was theirs to claim, but all captives went to the insatiable labor camps. The flow of slaves to the dark lands of the Chaos Dwarfs feeds two great needs: the sprawling mine pits and the bloody hunger of the bull Centaurs. Only by force of arms do we stop these plagues from draining our kingdoms dry. Gerlach Wernst, captain of arms in the Border Princes. The dreaded bull Centaurs were the most feared and respected cavalry of the Chaos Dwarfs. They were exalted members of society and trusted absolutely by the sorcerer prophets. Each generation of dwarf presided over the birth of mutant bull creatures, often causing the death of their mothers. The beasts arising from gory childbirth were even more twisted and violent than their dwarven kin, and afflicted with cannibalistic appetites. Sorcerers raised them in the temples to become shock troops and guardians. Due to their rare emergence, the sorcerers worked artificially to increase their numbers through dark rituals or fusion with machines. It descended from the dark skies like a firebolt, hotter than a forge where its fires, and many of our kin were slain. On this beast we have sworn revenge. Entry from Ungrin Ironfist's Book of Grudges. Malevolence boiled in the very magma that erupted from the Dark Lands. From it, horrifying monsters were formed from ash and shadow to reign the wastes. Those mutants were revered by the Chaos Dwarfs, and brought into their military ranks as inspiring avatars of Hashut and mounts for high-ranking officials. A favourite pet was the Baal Taurus, native to the volcanic heights. They were huge, mutant bulls, with massive, membranous wings, granting them the ability to fly. The bulls were so steeped in the red wind of magic that their very bodies burned like a great furnace. Blades striking the bulls melted from the heat, and arrows burst into flames. As it swept the battlefield, black smoke spewed from its nostrils, and sparks flew from hooves of iron. Occasionally, a Baal Taurus endured an extraordinarily rare mutation and became monsters known as Lamassu, a manticore-like brute imbued with magical ability. A grotesque face, framed with a lion's mane, replaced the bull's head, and an insidious charisma supplanted the simple mind of a beast. It breathed pure winds of magic, and made for the favourite mounts of sorcerer prophets. Other creatures, such as griffins and wyverns, were vulnerable to the alluring manipulations of the Lamassu, and they made for the perfect counter to mounted enemy commanders. In the eastern reaches of the Dark Lands, giants were found roaming the mountains of Morn. Chaos Dwarves long admired the ability of a lone giant to level villages, and learned to outfit them with specially forged plate armor for their size. Some giants perished during the process, as the armor was heat-fused or physically bolted onto their bodies. Those that survived were called Chaos Siege Giants, and sent to war as a devastating tool to tear down fortifications, war machines, or other monsters. Armed with giant chain flails, hooked blades, or pickaxes, they needed only a steady supply of fresh corpses to satisfy their hunger and ensure loyalty. Hear the summons of Hashut. The Dark Father calls you to slaughter. Blood and fire exhorts you to war. Hear the summons of Hashut. Spread your limbs of blood-oiled steel. The Zharr march forth once more. The Zharr march forth once more, answering the summons of Hashut. From the Kadai Rituals of Awakening. Deep in the cracked earth, hellish forges summoned the most horrible monsters of Chaos Dwarf ranks. Bubbling magma and boiling blood were captured in a frame of bronze and iron. Forged in the likeness of Contempt Incarnate, the rituals created a half-demon, half-fire servant race. The sorcerer prophets called them Kadai Fireborn, and were nearly uncontrollable forces of destruction. Because they were so volatile, they were kept in a state of cold dormancy until awakened for battle. When aroused from stasis, they immolated anything in their way until their fire had been spent completely. Rather than forge multiple constructs, the demon smiths could create a single frame, a behemoth fueled by many more souls and much more hellfire. The rituals to create a Kadai destroyer were much riskier, but the result was the creation of a colossus with no equal in destructive power. Destroyers were built as icons of great burning bulls, armored chaos dwarfs, rhinoxes, or even dragons, and awakened only through mass sacrifices. Though they were primarily used to crush fortifications or tussle with other monsters, Kadai destroyers could easily annihilate entire enemy units. Due to the costly nature of their constructs and limited population, much of the Chaos Dwarf military might came from their generous roster of war machines. While slaves and infantry held the line, artillery rained death onto the back line and reinforcements. Each was fine-tuned for maximum killing power, and were reflections of the Chaos Dwarf's malicious will to dominate. Hobgoblin slaves were permitted to independently operate bolt throwers for the explicit purpose of cutting down cavalry that threatened wolf riders. Even if the ballista was comparably low-tech, it was still capable of piercing thick armor and felling large single targets. A small crew of hobgoblins were able to operate the lightweight machine, so it made for an inexpensive tool requiring little management from overseers. Their cannons were phenomenally powerful. Their shells shook the land so hard it moved like it was water. Many horses fell and broke their legs. As to the Kislevites and my fellow mercenaries, it was a slaughter. I managed to survive only because the unit I was with routed early. I later learned that those they didn't kill were taken away in chains. Sigmar alone knows where. I left Kislev soon after, with the taste of ashes in my mouth. Ernst Wolfenberg, mercenary. One of the earliest cannon designs made by demonsmiths was the magma cannon. It was originally engineered to kill off the population of trolls or other unworkable creatures. The demonsmiths were so pleased with its effectiveness that it remained a mainstay in their armies. It was a fusion of furnace and artillery, and used pressurized steam boilers to volley arcs of burning sulfur or tar. Later variants fired enchanted shots that cradled magma in obsidian shells, shattering only once it slammed back into the ground. The sibling of the magma cannon was the Death Shrieker rocket launcher. It made its debut deep in the magma caverns of strip mines. Its purpose was to subdue lava trolls with chain harpoons. But the Chaos Dwarfs took the engineering a step further and outfitted the weapon with a longer barrel to accommodate rockets. Demonsmiths harvested fire spirits from Hashut's sacrificial altars and sealed them within the warheads. When their fuses were lit, they shot into the sky with blood-curdling screams. The released fire spirits descended as a storm of fire onto the field of battle and incinerated everything, friend or foe. Demonsmiths were always pursuing modifications to make their inventions the most efficient killing machines. In the case of the Hell Cannon, the smiths had pushed the limits of what was possible and not completely suicidal. The cannon was a frame built in much the same process as the Kadai. But instead of creating their own race of half-demons, they enslaved a sentient chaos demon and imprisoned it within the weapon. Just barely contained, the cannon needed to be bolted down to prevent it from rolling off in a blood-fueled rampage. Still living bodies of slaves and war captives were shoveled into the barrel as ammunition. The Hell Cannon hungrily devoured flesh and bone until only the souls remained. It concentrated them into a single orb of tormented energy and spewed it out at high speed from long range. On impact, the souls burst and rent the area with indescribable sadistic corruption. By far the most effective artillery on sheer destructive power alone was the Dreadquake mortar. The mortar was so large that it was unable to be moved except by way of a steam engine. Its munitions were so massive and unwieldy that the presence of an ogre slave was necessary to load shots. The construction of the shells themselves were a jealously guarded secret of the sorcerer prophets. Using anything but their specific ammunition was a quick route to self-destruction. When fired, it roared and sent a comet of blood-red light up into the air. Upon impact, the force of the bombardment tore craters into the earth. The Dreadquake mortar, the magma cannon, and the Death Shrieker rocket launcher could all be hauled by the latest and greatest locomotive. The Iron Demon was a juggernaut of iron, steam, and fire, capable of hauling up to 2 carriages loaded with artillery. Earlier models of the Iron Demon were used in the vast mines beneath the Dark Lands. Improvements were made to make the trains battle and siege-worthy. Iron Demons outfitted with arcane hammers, picks, and blades were named Skullcrackers and sent to pulverize fortifications and walls. They were fueled by enchanted coal that burned hotter and for longer, though the slaves swore that they ran on blood and souls. We will remake the world into our domain, a land of cinder ash and the blackened bones of our enemies, until only we remain and those broken bodies that cower at our feet. Astrogoth Ironhand. The oldest and the most powerful of the sorcerer prophets was Astrogoth. So ancient was this dwarf that he had partially succumbed to the curse of stone and lost a portion of his powers. The curse had turned his legs to stone, but the stubborn prophet invented his own steam-powered mechanical device that served as legs and augmented his speed and strength. Without the limitations of flesh, the machine was able to sprint faster, stab more, and smash harder than any other dwarf. He was a master of Hashut's Law of Fire, and capable of casting spells of cataclysmic power. As a champion of Zharr-Naggrund, he went into battle swinging a black hammer of Hashut. Upon his back, a sickly grey cloak, sewn from the flesh of failed demon-smiths, served as both a protective ward and a constant reminder of the price of defeat. Zhatan the Black, commander of the Tower of Zharr, orders that 1,000 swords be made of good black iron, 1,000 corselets of ruddy bronze, 1,000 arrowheads of 5 shekels of steel, and 10,000 of 2 shekels, and that this be delivered to the fortress of Zharr when the moon is full. Let it be known that Zhatan plunders to the west, and returns within the month with slaves for the service of Hashut. So say I, Zhatan the Black, commander of the Tower of Zharr, glory to Zhatan, glory to Gorth the Cruel, all praise Hashut, father of darkness. Proclamation made by Zhatan the Black, commander of the Tower of Zharr. Named for his extraordinarily cruel and sadistic nature even among his peers, Zhatan was a lord that served as the commander of the Tower of Zharr's garrison. Under his master and second most powerful sorcerer prophet, Gorth the Cruel, he was kept busy with the constant pursuit of slaves. He was so effective on the battlefield that the nearby goblin tribes would willingly send thousands of their own as tribute just to avoid a fight. When it came time for mass sacrifice, it was said that Zhatan's laughter was the only thing louder than the screams of the victims. In a fight, he wielded an obsidian axe and chaos rune shield that enabled him to cut through plate armor and negate enemy spells. His armor once belonged to the greatest of the Chaos Dwarf warriors, known as Gezrek, and possessed a durability that could withstand any physical blow. Walls? I see only piles of sand crafted by children. Bring my brothers close enough, and we shall take pleasure in fulfilling our bargain and topple them for you. Drashoth the Ashen. Exiled by Astragoth Ironhand following a political misstep, Drashoth crawled his way up the hierarchy of the Black Fortress to become its lord. During that time, he mastered magic and engineering and planned a grand return to Zharr-Naggrund. Having no equal among the Legion of Asgore, he commanded the army and assumed the role of enforcer of the border. It was a task he was all too content to maintain, for he required a great victory to enshrine his dominance over his rival Astragoth. On his patrols, he rode a great Bale Taurus named Cinderbreath, and wielded an iron staff mace known as the Graven Scepter. His armor was a unique set, forged with Gromril and blighted gold, that was cooled in vats of innocent blood and hellhound souls. Drashoth was protected by a Hellshard amulet that assaulted the senses of attackers with his own concentrated hate and malice. Chaos Dwarves were a blight on the world, rivaling the factions of Chaos. Try as they may to deny their existence, the Dwarfs loathed the coming day when their cousins would enact their own Age of Reckoning. More videos on the races of the Warhammer Fantasy world are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards & Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.